My father stood at the head of the dining table, glass raised high, wearing that grin I had known my whole life, the one that always meant someone was about to get hurt. "Let's toast to Daniel's latest midlife hobby," he announced, his voice filling every corner of our childhood home in Columbus, Ohio. 58 years old and still chasing stupid dreams. The laughter that followed came fast and easy. Aunts, uncles, cousins who barely came around, old neighbors who had somehow made the guest list. They all laughed along like it was the funniest thing they had heard in years. My sister, Pauline, stared down at her plate. My two sons, Tyler and Caleb, went very quiet. The stupid dream my father was mocking was my aviation training workshop. 3 years of work. A program built to retrain laid-off factory workers, people who had lost their jobs when the plant shut down, so they could build real careers as aircraft mechanics. People who needed someone to believe in them when nobody else would. To my father, it was a punchline. My chest burned. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could say a single word, the doorbell rang. My brother-in-law, Phil, went to answer it. A moment later, he came back to the dining room looking confused. "There's a man outside," he said slowly. "He says he's looking for Daniel Harper." The laughter stopped. The room went completely silent. I had no idea the next few minutes were about to change my life. My name is Daniel Harper. I am 58 years old, and I grew up right here in Columbus, Ohio. What I am about to share with you is a story of how one of the most humiliating nights of my life turned into the beginning of something I never could have imagined. If stories like this speak to you, stories about family, doubt, and what happens when you refuse to quit, please subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. You do not want to miss what comes next. The man who stepped through the front door did not look like someone who got lost. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with silver hair cut close and sharp blue eyes that swept the room like he had seen far bigger rooms than this one. He wore a simple dark jacket and no tie, and he carried himself the way men carry themselves when they have nothing left to prove. He did not look at my father first. He looked at me. "Daniel Harper?" he said, his voice calm and clear. "That's me," I said, still standing near my chair at the table. He crossed the room and held out his hand. "My name is Frank Callahan." The air changed immediately. My father's face went through 3 expressions in less than 2 seconds. Surprise, recognition, and then something much harder to read. Something that looked almost like fear. Frank Callahan. I had heard that name exactly once before, years ago, when my father mentioned an old friend who had moved away to chase some foolish idea. He had said it with the same voice he used for everything he disapproved of. "I've been trying to find you for a while," Frank said to me, ignoring the rest of the room entirely. "I saw your prototype training kit at a regional expo last spring. The aviation workshop." My father let out a short, nervous laugh. "Frank, come on, it's just I'm looking to invest," Frank said simply. "I'm serious." The room stayed silent. Nobody laughed. Frank came to my workshop the following morning. He arrived alone, no assistants, no briefcase, just a notebook and a sharp pair of eyes that missed nothing. The workshop sat in a rented building on the east side of Columbus. It was not much to look at from the outside. Concrete walls, a metal roof, a hand-painted sign above the door. But inside, it was everything I had built with my own 2 hands and the last of my savings. Frank walked slowly along the fuselage frame of the training aircraft kit I had designed myself. He ran his fingers along the joints the way a doctor checks for something he already suspects. He asked hard questions about materials, about cost per unit, about my vendor relationships and how long they had been in place. He asked to see my schematics, my patent filings, my trainee completion records. I gave him everything without flinching. "If I invest in this," he said, setting down the notebook after an hour, "it does not stay in Columbus. It goes national. That means full audits, financials, patents, supplier contracts, everything." He looked directly at me. "I don't invest in sentiment, Daniel. I invest in strength. If there are cracks, I will find them." "Find them," I said. He nodded slowly, almost to himself. That afternoon, my father called my sister Pauline. He told her the auditors were going to expose me. Word spread to the family, the way bad news always does, fast, and slightly twisted by the time it reaches you. By Wednesday, relatives I had not spoken to in months were suddenly calling with concerns. My Aunt Beverly phoned to ask if I was in some kind of trouble. A cousin sent a text asking if I needed a lawyer. Not one of them asked how things were actually going. My father was busy. He told anyone who would listen that I had always been impulsive, that I had walked away from a perfectly good job at an engineering firm 12 years ago, that I had a habit of starting things I never finished, that this would be no different. Most of it was true, in the way that facts could be arranged to tell a lie. What he left out was that I had left the engineering firm to care for my mother during her last 2 years, that every project I had ever abandoned had been set aside because something more important came along, that the workshop had been running for 3 years without a single late payment to any vendor. Then my oldest son, Tyler, pulled me aside one evening. "Dad," he said quietly, not quite looking me in the eye, "is Grandpa right? Is this going to fall apart?" That question hurt worse than the toast. I realized then that this was no longer about money. It was about something much older and much harder to fix, my credibility inside my own family. The audit was scheduled to take 5 business days. On the 3rd day, I got a call from my primary part supplier, a man named Wayne Guthrie, who ran a small components company out of Dayton. Wayne had been supplying my workshop for 2.5 years. We had a written agreement, a fair price, and a handshake relationship I thought was solid. He was pulling out of the contract. "I'm real sorry, Daniel," he said, and he did sound sorry. "But I've got to think about where my business is headed." I pressed him gently. He would not say more than that. 2 hours later, my brother-in-law Phil mentioned, casually, as if it meant nothing, that my father had lunch earlier that week with Wayne's older brother, a man named Carl Guthrie. My father and Carl had been golf partners for years. I could not prove anything. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe 2 old friends simply had lunch and my supplier decided on his own to walk away from a fair agreement at the worst possible moment. But the timing was brutal. Without Wayne's components, my cost model had a visible gap right in the middle of it. Frank's audit team spotted the problem within a day. One of his analysts flagged it in her written notes. I barely slept that night. Frank asked me to come in for a private meeting at the end of audit week. His team had set up temporary space in a rented office downtown, and when I arrived, 3 analysts were gathered around a table covered in printed spreadsheets. Frank dismissed them before I sat down. "Pressure reveals structure," he said, leaning back in his chair and studying me. "Some people crack under it. Some people build on it." He paused. "Which one are you?" I did not answer right away. I opened my folder and placed a document on the table between us. 8 months ago, I said, I drafted a backup sourcing plan. 3 alternative suppliers for every major component with pre-negotiated pricing. I put it together because I knew something could go wrong at any point, and I didn't want to be caught without an answer. Frank picked up the document and read it without a word. It took him 4 minutes. I counted. Then he set it down and nodded, slowly, just once. "You plan for failure," he said. "I plan to reality," I said. He almost smiled. There's a difference between those 2 things, and most people don't know it. That evening, my father received word that the audit had not collapsed. According to Pauline, he went very quiet after that, and then he grew colder than I had ever seen him. Frank invited me to dinner at a quiet restaurant near the riverfront. No analysts, no paperwork. Just the 2 of us and a corner table. He ordered coffee. I ordered the same. Neither of us looked at the menu for very long. "I'm going to tell you something I've never told your father," Frank said, turning his mug slowly in his hands. "And I think it'll explain a few things." He told me the story carefully, the way people tell stories they have carried for a long time. Decades ago, Frank and my father had been best friends. They grew up on the same street, went to the same school, and shared the same dream of building something together. When Frank found an opportunity to get into aerospace manufacturing, early, before the industry expanded, he brought it to my father first. My father said no. He called it too risky, too uncertain. He had a family, a stable job, a reputation to protect. He did not want to gamble everything on something that might not work. Frank went ahead without him. He built the company alone. Over the next 2 decades, it grew into one of the largest regional aerospace manufacturers in the country. My father never forgave him for succeeding. And after that, Frank said quietly, I don't think he could ever forgive anyone else for trying. I sat with that for a long time. The Sunday after my dinner with Frank, I went to church with Tyler and Caleb the way I usually did. My father attended the same church. He always had. I was talking to an old neighbor near the entrance when I heard it, my father's voice carrying clearly from about 15 feet away. They're looking into him, he was saying to a small group of men near the bulletin board. Outside investors. Could be legal issues. Hard to know. He said it the way you say something when you want it to spread, without looking like you meant it to. I waited until the service was over. Then I found him in the parking lot and asked to speak privately. We walked to the far end of the lot, away from the cars and the people. You told people I have legal problems, I said. He shrugged. I said investors were looking into things. That's true. You implied trouble. You know what you were doing. He straightened up, that familiar look coming back into his face. I'm protecting this family from embarrassment, Daniel. Someone has to. I had heard that line my entire life. Someone has to protect the family. Someone has to be realistic. Someone has to say the hard things. I looked at him calmly. No, Dad, I said, you're protecting yourself. It was the first time I had ever said it out loud. The final audit report came back on a Thursday. Frank called me into the downtown office again. His lead analyst, a composed woman named Patricia, placed a bound report on the table and walked him through the numbers while I sat across from them. My workshop had a 92% completion rate for its trainees. That meant that out of every 100 people who started the program, 92 finished it with a recognized certification. 3 graduates had already been hired as full-time mechanics at regional aviation companies. 2 more had job offers pending. Frank studied the numbers for a long moment. Then he looked up. These are stronger than I expected, he said. There was real surprise in his voice. Not polite surprise, but actual surprise. Patricia nodded. The completion rate alone puts it in the top tier for vocational programs nationally. The placement numbers are modest but consistent. Frank turned back to me. Why didn't you scale this sooner? With numbers like these, you could have applied for federal workforce grants 2 years ago. Regional development funds. You left real money on the table. I thought about my answer before I gave it. Because I was afraid to fail publicly, I said. Small felt safer. Frank was quiet for a moment. That's the most honest thing anyone has said to me during a pitch in 10 years, he said. But it's also the thing we're going to have to fix. I nodded. I already knew he was right. That same evening, I came home to find Caleb sitting at the kitchen table, pretending to read something. I could tell from the way he was sitting that he had been waiting for me. Caleb was my younger son. 24, quiet, thoughtful, the kind of person who held things in until they had no choice but to come out. He had his mother's eyes and my stubborn streak, which was not always a comfortable combination. Dad, he said, putting down the book he clearly had not been reading. Yeah, I told my friends last month that you tinker with planes. He said it without looking at me, that it's kind of a hobby thing, that you build model kits or whatever. I sat down across from him. I didn't say it to be mean, he continued. I didn't really understand what it was. I guess I didn't think it was serious. He finally looked up. Is it serious? It's the most serious thing I've ever done, I said. He nodded slowly. Then he said the thing that hit me harder than anything my father had said at that table. I think I've been saying Grandpa's words without knowing it. I reached over and put my hand on his shoulder. I did not say anything for a while. I did not need to. Some truths land better in silence. Frank presented the preliminary offer on a Tuesday morning in October. He laid it out cleanly, no drama, no build-up, the way serious people present serious things. National rollout funding, a full operational budget for the first 3 years, marketing support, legal support, and a placement team to connect graduates with hiring companies across 8 states. But there were conditions. The headquarters had to relocate to a larger hub city. Frank suggested either Cincinnati or Pittsburgh to access the infrastructure and talent pipeline the program would need to grow. And I would need to step into the role of CEO full-time, which meant walking away from the part-time consulting work that had kept me financially steady for years. To accept, I would need to put in my own retirement savings as a matching investment, a requirement Frank held for all his partners. Skin in the game, he called it. If it worked, the program could change the lives of thousands of displaced workers across the country. If it failed, I would have nothing left at 58 years old. When my father heard the terms, he called me that evening. "You'll lose everything," he said. His voice was flat, certain, the way it always sounded when he had already made a decision about something. He did not ask me what I was thinking. He never did. The family dinner happened the following Sunday. It had not been planned as a meeting about my decision. My sister Pauline had organized a birthday dinner for her husband, Phil. But somehow, the way things always seem to happen in our family, it turned into something else entirely. My father brought it up between the main course and dessert. "At some point in your life," he said, addressing the table more than me specifically, "you stop gambling with what you have. You protect it. You protect your family." He looked around at everyone. Daniel is about to risk everything he has left on a venture that could collapse inside a year. Pauline nodded slowly, not making eye contact with me. Phil kept eating. Tyler looked at his plate. Caleb glanced at me once, then away. My father continued, "It's not selfish to be smart. It's selfish to expect other people to watch you make choices that hurt them too." Silence followed. I looked around the table at my family, at the people I had grown up with, argue with, love in the complicated way you love people who have never quite seen you clearly. If I accepted Frank's offer, I might fracture what little remained between us. If I declined, I would be confirming everything they had always believed about me. Neither option felt like winning. I could not sleep. I woke at 4 a.m, that particular hour when the house is so quiet that every thought sounds louder than it should, and lay in the dark staring at the ceiling for about 20 minutes before I gave up and got dressed. I drove to the workshop. It was cold that time of morning. The parking lot was empty, the streetlights casting long shadows across the concrete. I unlocked the door, turned on the overhead lights, and stood in the middle of the main floor by myself. The fuselage frame was exactly where I had left it. Tools were arranged on the bench the way I always kept them. Completion certificates for the latest group of trainees were lined up on my desk, waiting to be mailed. I thought about a man named Roy, a 52-year-old machinist who had sat in my very first training session 3 years ago with his hands folded and his jaw tight, too proud to admit he was scared. He had finished the program in 11 weeks. He called me on the day he got his job offer, and the first thing he said was, "I didn't think I was worth it anymore." I thought about how many more men like Roy were out there waiting. Then I picked up my phone and called Frank. "Let's do it," I said. My voice did not shake. The final legal review was supposed to be the easy part. Frank's legal team had been working through the paperwork for 3 weeks. Agreements, liability structures, federal compliance documents. It was all moving smoothly. My attorney, a sharp woman named Carol Briggs, had reviewed every page twice and found nothing to worry about. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, Frank's lead attorney called me directly. He told me that during a routine trademark search, his team had discovered an existing filing tied to a phrase nearly identical to my workshop's original branding, a registered slogan, vague enough to apply to aviation training programs, filed under a small holding company in Columbus. The holding company was registered to my father. He had filed it 4 years ago, 2 years before I had even launched the workshop publicly. He must have noticed the branding during an early family visit and filed it quietly, just in case. Those were the exact words he used when Frank's attorney reached him. It was not illegal. He had filed it properly, paid the fee, done everything by the book. But it was enough to cast a shadow on the brand during a critical stage of investment. Enough to cause delays if his side decided to make noise about it in court. Frank called me after he heard the news. His voice was very controlled. "How do you want to handle this?" he asked. I spent one evening thinking about it. I could fight the trademark filing. Carol Briggs told me I had a reasonable case, The branding was vague, the connection to my specific program was arguable, and a judge might see it my way. But a legal battle meant time, money, and the kind of public-family dispute that would make investors nervous. My father was counting on exactly that, so I did not fight. Instead, I made a phone call to a graphic designer I had worked with before, a young woman named Bree, and told her I needed a complete rebrand, new name, new logo, new visual identity, within 10 days. The new name came from my mother. Her maiden name was Alderman. I had always loved the sound of it. Clean, sturdy, built to last. I named the program Alderman Aviation Academy and filed the trademark before the week was out. The rebrand did something I had not expected. When people in Columbus heard the new name and the story behind it, a son honoring his late mother, the response was immediate. Former trainees shared the announcement online. A local radio station did a short feature. Community groups reached out wanting to learn more. My father had tried to use a name against me. I had replaced it with one that was unbreakable. He had not seen that coming. The official partnership announcement ran in a regional business journal on a Friday morning in early November. I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee when my phone started ringing. It did not stop for most of the day. Former co-workers from the engineering firm I had left 12 years ago. People I had gone to school with. Graduates of the workshop program who had seen the articles shared online. A community college administrator asking about curriculum partnerships. A workforce development nonprofit inquiring about a joint grant application. The calls came from places I had not expected, and they kept coming. My sister Pauline sent me a text in the early afternoon. It said, simply, I saw the article. I'm proud of you. No explanation, no apology for the family dinner 2 weeks earlier, just those 5 words. I saved the message. My father also received calls that day, several of them, from what Pauline told me later, not the congratulatory kind. Carl Guthrie, the man who had shared a lunch with my father the week Wayne pulled out of my contract, apparently called my father that afternoon. Word had gotten around about the circumstances. Carl was not pleased that his brother's name had ended up connected to the story, even indirectly. Old friendships, it turns out, do not always survive the things you do in their name. 3 weeks after the announcement, Frank called me with news I had not seen coming. One of the major investors backing his side of the deal, a private equity group out of Pittsburgh named Harrow Capital, had raised a formal concern. It had nothing to do with the audit, the rebrand, or the supplier situation. It had to do with my age. 58 years old, they said, was a succession risk. What happened to the program if I could not continue? What was the plan for long-term leadership? Was there a pipeline of people who could carry it forward if circumstances changed? They called it succession risk, which is a polished way of saying they were not sure I would be around long enough to see it through. Frank told me this without softening it. They haven't pulled out, he said, but they're asking questions, and we need a strong answer within the week. I told him I would have one. That evening, my father called. I let it go to voicemail, which I almost never did. When I listened to the message later, his voice was almost warm. The careful warmth of a man who believes he has just been proven right. Thought you should know, he said. Heard there were concerns from the investors. Told you so. I deleted the message and got to work. The answer I brought back to Frank and the Harrow Capital team was not what they expected. Most people in my position, I think, would have argued, would have pointed to their track record, their passion, their determination, would have made it personal. I made it structural. I presented a full mentorship pipeline, a plan to identify and train 3 to 5 junior instructors within the first year of national operations, drawn from the top graduates of each cohort. These instructors would shadow me through every level of the program, from curriculum design to trainee support to daily operations. Within 3 years, any one of them will be capable of running an Alderman Aviation Academy campus independently. I also propose a formal advisory board, experienced aviation educators, and workforce development professionals who will provide oversight and continuity regardless of who stood at the front of the classroom. The program was not built around me. It never had been. Frank sat quietly while I walked through the slides. The Harrow Capital representatives exchanged glances I could not entirely read. When I finished, there was a pause. Then the lead partner leaned forward. "This is stronger than what we asked for," she said. "You didn't just answer the question. You solved a problem we hadn't fully named yet." The hesitation faded. Completely and immediately. My father came to the workshop on a Thursday evening 2 weeks before Christmas. I had not invited him. He called that afternoon and asked if he could stop by after 6, and something in his voice made me say yes even though part of me wanted to say no. He arrived on time, which was unusual for him. He stood inside the door for a moment, looking around the floor, the fuselage frame, the tool bench, the rows of certificates on the wall. I let him look. Then he sat down in one of the plastic chairs near my desk and folded his hands. "I don't know how to say this," he started. "Then just say it," I said. He was quiet for another moment. "Why was it never enough?" he asked. His voice came out differently than I was used to. Smaller, stripped of the authority he usually wore like a coat. "Everything I did, everything I tried to give you, why wasn't I enough for you to just stay?" It was the most honest question he had ever asked me. I looked at him for a long time before I answered. "Dad," I said, "I didn't need you to be enough. I never needed that from you." I took a breath. I needed you to believe me. Just once. That's all it would have taken. The silence that followed was the heaviest one I had ever shared with another person. Frank called on the 15th of December. It was a Monday. I remember that clearly because I had spent most of the morning at the workshop, reviewing the curriculum framework for the first national cohort, trying to stay focused on the work instead of checking my phone every 20 minutes. When his name appeared on the screen, I sat down before I answered. "Full funding approved," he said. No build-up, no preamble, just the words. Harrow Capital signed this morning. National rollout begins in the first quarter. Alderman Aviation Academy goes live. I sat there for a moment, holding the phone. "Daniel." "Yeah," I said. "I'm here." "You've earned this," Frank said. "Every part of it." I thanked him and ended the call. Then I sat alone in the empty workshop for a long time, not celebrating, not calling anyone, not posting anything online, just sitting in the space I had built with my own hands, surrounded by 3 years of work that most people had called a hobby. I did not feel triumphant the way I had once imagined I would. I felt steady, quiet, grounded in a way I had never quite felt before, like a man who had finally found his footing after a very long walk across uncertain ground. After a while, I called Tyler and Caleb. Then I called Frank back and started talking about next steps. The town hall event was held on a Thursday evening in February at the Columbus Convention Center. It was a workforce innovation summit hosted by the City Council, focused on programs creating real employment pathways for displaced workers in the region. Several organizations have been invited to present. I had been asked to speak for 15 minutes. What I did not know until I arrived was that the event committee had decided to present me with a formal recognition award for community impact before my speaking slot. The room held roughly 300 people, council members, business leaders, nonprofit directors, community organizers, and a large section of chairs filled with former trainees and their families. My 2 sons sat in the 3rd row. Pauline sat beside them. And in the back row, near the aisle, sat my father. He had not told me he was coming. Pauline must have let him know about the event. He sat in his coat with his hands in his lap, and his face arranged into an expression I could not quite name from across the room. When the council chair read out my name and the citation that came with the award, I walked in front of the room and accepted the plaque. I looked out at the audience. My father did not stand. He did not clap the loudest, but his eyes were on me, and for once, for the very first time, he was not speaking. When I finished the formal presentation on the Alderman Aviation Academy, the room applauded longer than I expected. Then the event moderator asked a question that had not been part of the planned program. She leaned toward her microphone and said, "Mr. Harper, before we close, is there anyone who inspired you to keep going when things were difficult?" The room settled into a careful quiet. I stood at the podium and looked out at the audience. My sons in the 3rd row, Pauline wiping the corner of her eye with the back of her hand. Frank Callahan somewhere near the left side of the room, arms folded, the ghost of a smile on his face. My father in the back row, very still. I thought about what I wanted to say. I had about 3 seconds to decide. I could have said Frank's name. I could have talked about my mother. I could have talked about Roy and the other trainees who had taught me more about courage than I had ever taught them about aircraft mechanics. Instead, I paused, looked down at the podium for just a moment, and then looked back at the room. I've learned, I said slowly, that doubt can do one of two things to a person. It can bury you or it can build you. I let the room sit with that. I chose to let it build me. The applause that followed was longer than anything else that evening. He came to the workshop on a Saturday morning in March. No phone call this time, no warning. I looked up from the desk where I was reviewing instructor applications and saw my father standing just inside the open door, hat in his hand, looking like a man who had rehearsed something on the drive over and then forgotten the moment he arrived. I got up and pulled a chair over for him. He sat down. He looked around the room the way he had on his first visit, but something was different in his face this time. The stiffness was gone. Most of it, anyway. I walked away from Frank all those years ago, he said without being prompted. He was looking at the fuselage frame, not at me. He built something real. I told myself it was luck. I told myself he had advantages I didn't have. He paused. I told myself that for a long time because it was easier than the truth. I waited. I didn't want you to outgrow me. He said it quietly, the way you say something you have never said out loud before. That's all it was. I was afraid that if you actually made it, if you built something real, I'd have to admit I've been wrong my whole life. He finally looked at me. I was wrong, he said. I did not say anything for a long time, but I did not look away from him either. Sprint arrived early that year. The first national cohort of Alderman Aviation Academy launched in March across 3 cities, Columbus, Pittsburgh, and Louisville, with 62 trainees enrolled in the opening sessions. By the end of the first month, the completion rate was tracking at 94%, 2 points higher than the Columbus workshop had managed in its very first year. Tyler started volunteering at the Columbus location on weekends. He helped with intake paperwork at first, then began sitting in on sessions, and eventually started leading a basic tools workshop for incoming trainees who had no prior technical background. He was good at it, patient, clear, the kind of teacher who explains something twice without making you feel slow for needing it. Caleb drove up from his apartment in Cleveland one Saturday to see the operation in person. Afterward, he stood in the parking lot and said, "Dad, this is actually incredible." He sounded genuinely surprised, and I did not hold that against him. When they introduced me to their friends now, neither of my sons used the word tinkers. Tyler introduced me as his father, the founder. Caleb introduced me as the man who built the academy. The narrative had shifted, not just for the program, but for us. Something that had been quietly broken for a long time was beginning, slowly and carefully, to heal. The family gathering in April was Pauline's idea. She had organized a spring dinner. No particular occasion, just food and people and the chance to sit in a room together without any agenda. About 15 of us crowded around the extended table, which had been pushed out to fit everyone. For most of the evening, my father was quiet. He ate. He listened. He laughed a few times at something Tyler said, which surprised me. He and Frank had spoken on the phone twice since the town hall event. Pauline had mentioned. Short calls about nothing in particular. Just 2 old friends slowly remembering how to talk to each other. Then, near the end of the evening, my father reached for his glass. The room noticed immediately. People who had been at the last dinner where he raised a glass went quiet almost automatically, bracing, the way you brace when you've been caught off guard before. He stood up slowly. He cleared his throat. "To my son," he said, and then he stopped and took a breath, as though the words were heavier than he had expected them to be. Who proved that courage does not expire with age. There was no laughter this time, just applause. I looked around the table, at my sons, at Pauline, at Phil, at the cousins, and the aunts who had laughed the last time. I looked at my father, who was still standing with his glass raised, something in his face I had not seen there before. Not pride exactly, something quieter than pride, something closer to peace. I picked up my glass. I had not won by humiliating him. I had won by becoming undeniable.